All right, I think that we can start.
Yeah, okay. So, this is Miguel. You all know Miguel. Miguel is known for starting a lot of projects in the open source community. He started GNOME, started Mono, started Moonlight. Right now what he's doing is doing a lot of slides with shortcuts in it. But no, he's still leading the Mono project, Moonlight project, a lot of projects. Either we do an introduction of 30 minutes or just keep it short.
All right, yeah. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Stefan. And thank you to Ruben and Stefan for setting this Mono developer room today. So, as an enemy of freedom, I'm here to pollute your thoughts. Thank you. You know, the other day I passed Richard Stallman on the street in Cambridge, and I said, "Hey, Richard," and he kept walking. I was like, "All right." I figured, okay, I think he doesn't like me anymore. Anyways, I wanted to start because the last time that I did a presentation at FOSDEM, some of the most sensible people in the audience were a little bit upset because I showed a commercial product. So I'm going to try very hard today to not show you any commercial product, to not offend your sensibilities. That being said, my good friends from that commercial company are here. Lucas Meyer, who does really interesting work, and Massimiliano Mantioni, who's there, now work for that company that writes evil software. So they're really good guys if you want to talk to some people that are bringing really interesting stuff. Anyways, I'll try to keep the Coca-Cola out of the discussion. But it might not happen. So if you're a person that is easily offended, you might want to leave now. Okay, that being said, damn it, what is going on here? All right, here we go. So I'm going to give you a quick update of where we are with Mono today. As it turns out, I'm not going to cover some of this stuff. Juice covered Mono Develop this morning and the amazing things that we're doing with debugging there. I don't think that his demos were as good as all of the things that it does today, but that's okay. You know, as you know, we've been working on Mono for a very long time. It's almost been 10 years since we started. We're in the 9th year of working on Mono, and a lot of things have happened there. When we started the project, I thought, as usual, that we could be done in about 2 years, and somehow I'm still doing this. So, you know, it's been a very interesting, it's been a fantastic experience, of course, and I don't regret any minute of it. We started working on Moonlight about 2 years ago. No, what, 3 years ago? This is the first time that we actually got Microsoft to collaborate with us, and it's been a very interesting experience for us. Mono Develop was a project that was a project that started actually out of the community. It's something we were never planning on doing. And it's odd, and I'll explain to you why in a second when I get some of the other topics. So that's one of those are the 3 major projects that we'll work on. And then finally, we kind of do you know, commercial projects. So I'm not going to even discuss those things today to not offend some of you. So I'm just going to focus on the 3 above. So a quick update: since the last time we were at FOSDEM, we've done a lot of things, and we've released a lot of software. We've been releasing software like crazy ever since. We did our Mono 2.0 release. This was getting feature parity with .NET 2.0. We did our 2.2 release, which was mostly about improving the performance and upgrading our JIT engine. Our JIT engine needed some very significant upgrades. We did that work with 2.2. And of course, in each one of these releases, we keep improving the class library support and things like that. 2.4 became the first long-term supported version of Mono. So this is the first time that we said, we're going to support this with bug fixes, security issues, and so on for 18 months. So, you know, it's been more work than we actually wanted to do, but it had to be done. So that's Mono 2.4. And that's the release that we officially support and the release that we officially fix bugs for. And finally, the release that we just released 2.6. It brings Mono to .NET 3.5 compatibility, just a few months short of Microsoft shipping .NET 4.0. And we'll talk about what our plans are there. Now, with Moonlight, again, Moonlight started as a project that was kind of a stunt. And you have to remember, if you put it into context, Microsoft really never liked Mono. they were never very happy about the existence of Mono in the first place. So, for example, we went to their conferences and we tried to get talks approved at their conference, and they would always find a way for either rigging the votes or making sure that, oh, all the rooms are full. Oh, sorry about that, you can't really present. Or, oh, you know, we lost the paperwork, you can really present here. So we used a number of guerrilla techniques over the years. The first one was that we used Post-it notes and we actually went and patched the programs. So we announced the alternative BOF session of Mono. That was the first thing that we did. The second thing that we did was some rogue Microsoft employees actually got us time inside their talks, but it was kind of unofficial. So that was on that same year PDC. The other thing that we did is then we hosted a lunch session. So in the middle of the hallways for the Microsoft conference, there was a lunch area, and we had a meeting there. And there were about probably 80 people there. And we had to yell, basically, to get the message across, and gave T-shirts. So that was a really good year. The third year, we couldn't really do that because the police the last time actually were not happy about us using space that we hadn't paid for. So we actually rented a room about a dozen blocks away from the conference center, and we had people come in. And that was a lot of fun because a lot of the Microsoft employees actually showed up, and a couple of people in the community actually said this was really good. It was scheduled to last for an hour and lasted about 5 hours. And it was just a bunch of happy open source people exchanging ideas with each other. Then things started to change slowly. With Moonlight, we kind of so just so you know, what we're trying to do at that point was, we're trying to promote the idea of an open source implementation or running .NET applications on Linux. And so as I said, this didn't really go well with Microsoft. So one day at one of these rogue events, it turns out that we met the guy from Microsoft France, Marc Jalabert. And Marc says, I would really like if you guys come to the Mix conference and do a talk about Moonlight. Or no, it didn't even exist. A talk about Mono. This was just after Microsoft had announced the Silverlight, and I said, I actually like this very much. We're going to build an implementation, right? So this is, in the heat of the moment, a journalist comes and asks me, so what do you think of this? And I thought, this is awesome. We're going to build a clone, right? I didn't really think about this. I didn't talk to my manager about this. I had no budget. I had no permission. But I figured, what can happen, right? Because like a friend of mine in Mexico used to say, my friend used to say, when it comes, when it's a time for fast decisions, I'm a man of action, right? Have you heard this before? I've repeated it like a million times. When there's a time for, for acting quickly, I am a man of action. And when the time comes for calm, rational decisions, I'm a man of action. So I am a man of action. So I announced that we're going to do that regardless of, without any permission. And what was interesting is that this guy, Marc Jalabert, said, hey, why don't you come and present Mono at the Microsoft conference in Paris? And I figured, well, I need to take this opportunity because this guy obviously hasn't talked to his boss. Because if he does, we're going to shut it down. So I said, yes, of course, as long as you don't announce it. So he didn't announce it, and I didn't think that he was serious until one day when he sends me an email and say, hey, we were serious. We want to have you in the keynote. And if you want, we'll give you a session too. So I said, and why don't you talk about Silverlight on Linux? And of course, we had absolutely nothing. We had 0 lines of code written, nothing done. So he said, yeah, of course, we'll show Silverlight on Linux running. No problem. So I sent an email. To my team, and I said, okay, guys, we got 3 weeks. Whoever wants to join on this hackathon, we need to make Silverlight run on Linux. So who's in? And about 6 or 7 people said I'm in. And I don't think we've ever worked as hard. I've never worked as hard in my life as those 3 weeks. It was 21 days, and I think that we're working 18 hours, 20-hour days for 3 weeks. But we managed to get all of the demos that Microsoft showed at the previous conference at Mix in March ready by the what is this thing? June 21st? That day where the French make that, they have this celebration on the street with musicians. Anyways, it was that day. And just before my presentation, now the problem is that the night before, the Microsoft guy calls me and he had to notify his boss that he was having me on the keynote. And that didn't go very well. But anyways, the guy kind of said, okay, we already made an announcement, we're gonna let it through. So what happened is, we did the announcement, we showed this stuff, and I was updating from SVN 5 minutes before the demo, just to get the last fixes in. And we managed to demo it. It was very broken. Of course, it didn't have a security system. It was lacking a lot of things, but it was able to show at least everything that Microsoft showed at the previous conference. So it was quite an achievement. Then we signed an agreement with Microsoft in which they agreed to give us test suites to make sure that Moonlight on Linux ran everything that it was supposed to run. And they gave us access to their engineers so we could ask them questions. Now, part of the agreement is we really didn't care about Moonlight 1.0, which is a JavaScript-only engine. We only cared about this one. But part of the agreement required that we build the 1.0 runtime. So we said, all right, let's go build that piece of junk. So we built that thing, and there were probably only one application, which was the live streaming of Obama from the official feed was running on Silverlight. So that was probably the only use that we had for that. Then we released 2.0. We just released 2.0 a couple of months ago. The reason why it took so long from, we had most of this done in 3 weeks, why did it take us 2 years to build it, is because we needed to have a security system in place. Mono didn't have a security system and basically trusted everything you did. So if you said, I want to access the file system, it would let you access the file system. I want to scan the file system of the user, copy each file over a network socket and post it to the internet, it would let you do that. So obviously, obviously this didn't really work. Because when you're on the internet, you should assume that all of the code that you're getting is hostile code, right? So it took us a couple of years to work on this. We had to build a verifier. We had to build a security sandbox. We had to audit the code. We had to add security policies to sockets. We had to add whitelist and blacklist for APIs to make sure that the entire system was locked down. And Microsoft did help us. And Microsoft actually did help us make that happen. Now, as of last week, we released our first version of 3.0. So we're catching up quickly to what Microsoft has. And this is our first preview of Moonlight. And we're hoping to do another release in the next few days for the Olympics. The Olympics, at least in the United States and a couple of other countries, will be streamed live with Silverlight because Microsoft has done the business development on that area. So we'll be streaming that using Moonlight. There's still a couple of bugs here and there, and we don't support Chrome, and it's all Andrea's fault, who's right there. So if you're a Chrome user, she's the person that you need to complain to for not fixing that bug fast enough, despite the extensive 2-week period that she had to fix it. So anyways, Andrea, just raise your hand. So she's wearing black. So if you're a Chrome user, like everybody else, I stopped using Firefox a couple of weeks ago. Anyways, we have a couple of nice things in store. I'll talk a little bit more about this, but Mono 2.8, which should come out a few weeks after .NET 4.0 ships, is going to be a big release for us. It's going to be big in a couple of ways. The first one is that it's the first time that we're actually going to ship the C# language compiler at the same time as Microsoft is. So in the past, for example, when they released C# 1, it took us about a year to get C# 1. When they shipped C# 2, it took us about a year and a half to get it. C# 2 was a very complicated process for us. C# 3, again, took us we were about a year late. With C# 4 is the first time that we're going to have that. In fact, the compiler is ready to go out now. You can get it today. It's complete. It's finished. It's done. And this is before their compiler ships. So they're both in beta. And by the time they're shipped, they're both going to be in release mode. So you should be able to get that. The other piece that we did is with 2.8, we're switching to LLVM as our code generation engine. Well, we're not switching. We're making it an option. And what that means is you'll be able to continue using Mono's FastJIT engine for most operations, but for certain loads, you'll be able to use LLVM. And 3.0, which should be out in June, is the first time that we're going to have a compacting garbage collector. I know that most of you people don't care about this. In fact, Lucas last night was telling me, don't talk about LLVM, don't talk about SGN, nobody cares. 30% performance increase, nobody cares. I'm like, all right. So I'm going to keep it short. Then MonoDevel, we did 2.0 and 2.2. So it's been a lot of progress since the last time I was here at FOSDEM, and it's been a lot of fun. Now, of course, I don't really have the time to talk about everything that is going on in the mono world. It's too complicated. This slide is just up so you can read it quickly and we can move on quickly. But there's too many things happening. And when I had to pick what to talk about today, I really struggled about what is it that I wanted to talk to you today. And to some extent, it was a choice that was made simpler because Uis was talking about MonoDevelop, so I didn't have to do that. Ivan was talking about Aaron Ruby. I don't need to do that. Alan is having a talk about. Alan has a talk about BitTorrent. I don't need to talk about that. So there's other talks that will complement what I should have said initially. But there's a lot of really interesting things happening. Like for example, our C# compiler, which is written in C#. Actually, there's about 12 different forks of the compiler. So people have taken our compiler and made changes, and they're exploring different, language techniques or things like that. So, it's been a very interesting experiment, and I won't even bother going through the rest. And do we have any water? No, we don't. All right. Well, I already talked to you about this. This is our Microsoft collaboration for Moonlight. And although it was initially a collaboration around Moonlight, it seems like they are willing to extend this collaboration now to Mon on the server, which is something that I thought they would never do. Now, a little bit of a patent update, because I know that all of you are scared shitless about patents. So the most important thing is that compared to pretty much any other piece of open source software, actually Mono has gotten the most patent covenants, and that is the most patent coverage than anyone else. And in large part because there's been an uproar in the community about, well, what is the situation with Mono and patents? So this is a quick update on what we have today. C# is covered by the community promise, both the ECMA 334 and the ISO versions of the standard, which means you can use it for anything you want. The patents are only available for C# implementations, which is actually quite ironic. It basically means that you're more protected from a Microsoft patent threat if you use C# than if you use another language that copy ideas from C#, because the patents are not granted to those. So it's, I think that there's something to be said about Microsoft not having the interest of the open source community at heart. So that is true. But as I said, at least the C# piece is available. The same thing applies to the CLI. And the ECMA committee is in session for publishing the 6th edition, I believe, of ECMA 335. Other pieces, things like Silverlight, are covered by XAML, by Silverlight XAML as well. So both vocabularies for Silverlight are in the open, and those ones come with no strings attached. So that is pretty good. I forgot to mention also that the Moonlight 3 and 4 covenant no longer has a Novell-specific coverage. Everybody is covered equally under Moonlight 3 and 4. Unlike the previous version that was Novell-specific, this time Novell gets the same rights as everybody else. There is one difference, though. Novell is a licensed source to MPEG-LA, which means that when you get the software from Novell, you will get codecs. So H.264 and VC1. Just like with Google, you have Google Chrome and Google Chromium, and Google Chrome comes with codecs and Chromium doesn't. The same thing applies with Moonlight. If you want to get the codecs, you need to talk to MPEG-LA and figure out what the licensing deal is there. This is not a Microsoft patent. This is an MPEG-LA patent. Then additionally, there's a bunch of patent grants that come with different pieces that Microsoft has open sourced. So they have open sourced ASP.NET MVC, the dynamic language runtime. We just heard about that a few minutes ago. Orchard, which is a content management site, ASP.NET Ajax, the managed extension framework, and 2 languages, Iron Python, Iron Ruby. And there's a couple more things to come, but we're not ready. Well, they're not ready to announce that yet. The rumor is that F# will be an open source compiler, so which is an interesting language for a researcher. It's a rumor, and that's all there is to it. So now when it comes to, so that's kind of an overview, a quick overview, and we're probably gonna touch on different subjects from now on. And the problem is that a couple of months ago I asked, so what do people want to hear about I was doing a presentation at Stack Overflow, And I said, what do you guys want to hear about Mono? And so I made a quick poll, because these days my entire life is driven by what people say on polls. So I set up a Google poll, and I asked people what to do. And the problem was that, as you can see, there's really nothing out there that, it seems like people don't really have a good opinion. There's no one topic that people really want to hear about. So I ended up figuring out that I'll just talk about whatever the fuck I want. And it might be interesting or it might not be. Now, the bad news is that already UIS took Mono developed, so I can't talk about that. And I can't talk about any Coca-Cola based products. So, so technically, I shouldn't say that 500 applications on the App Store are built with Mono, and that 10% of the top selling games for the App Store are built with Unity's product. So I won't mention that. But I will talk about happiness. Right, so I read this book. There's a couple of journalists that are obsessed with everything that I do in my life. I do like the attention. I do like the attention. But the problem is that they really don't like me. So that can be kind of a bummer. So I read this book a few years ago, and I reread it again every time I read one of these clowns writing in the press. And I strongly recommend everybody to read it, because it's a really nice book. Well, I'm not going to tell you, because that is my secret. That is my secret sauce. That's what keeps me happy. No, the name of the guy is called Benjamin Zander, and he wrote a book called The Art of Possibility. And I met this guy once. There was a dinner of a bunch of interesting people, and at the end of the dinner, they said, well, you need to go. There's a presentation specially for you guys by this guy, and he's the director of the Boston Philharmonic. And we all got together, went to this thing. Kind of wanted to go home, can just go to the hotel and call it a night. But we went to see this guy, and this guy is the director of the Boston Philharmonic, and he just exudes joy, right? So basically, the guy just had a flight cancellation. He couldn't make his flight. He lost the train. He lost everything. But he still managed to go there and teach us about what made him tick. And it was a very encouraging talk. But at the end of the day, there's a couple of things. There are things that make you happy and things that make you unhappy. And you might as well just focus on the things that make you happy. So I'll tell you a little bit about what makes me happy as a programmer. There are many things that make me happy, but as a programmer, Ivan was just talking a few minutes ago about Ruby, and I was telling Jim, dude, he just stole my talk. But is Ivan still in the room?
Ivan not
right. So
He'll come back then.
All right, we'll get to that in a second. So anyways, as a programmer, every time you guys take a shower, well, at least that happens with me. Every time in the morning, I don't know why it happens, but every time in the morning, I get into the shower, and I have like a billion ideas of things I want to do, right? And the moment I step out of the shower, it's like, fuck, I'm not gonna do anything. You go, you check your email, and and by the end of the day, your life is gone. You've read all this junk, and you didn't do any of the things, great ideas that you had during the shower. It also happens when I'm walking. When I'm walking to work, I have billions of ideas, and so I decided to get a tape recorder. And these days, what I do is I record my ideas, and hoping that one day I'll have time to make them happen. And what happens is that many of you, when you have an idea, the question is how you bring your idea to the world, right? And this is basic software engineering. So I'm just talking about ideas in the software engineering realm. Sometimes we get we're too full of ourselves, right? We fight about software freedoms, and we fight about what's good for the world. And in the meantime, the Palestinians are being massacred. The Haiti is destroyed. So putting things into perspective, it's a small world. But anyways, so just from the engineering perspective, right? you have your idea, you go and write your program, and it's a good program. You're happy with your program. Now the question is, how do you bring this to the world, right? And usually people get confused. Do we have an eraser? Yeah, we do. So sometimes people get confused because I don't know if you guys have heard this discussion, and they say, well, Linux doesn't innovate, or Windows doesn't innovate, or Apple just copied this from someone else. And I actually went and looked up the definition of the word innovation. And what is interesting about the word innovation is innovation doesn't mean having an idea, because every one of us, when we're taking a shower in the morning, we have a dozen ideas, and every time you go to work or whatever else, you have hundreds and hundreds of ideas. So it's not that the world is lacking on ideas. It's not like we don't have those ideas every day. But there's a very big difference between having the idea and coming up with a new idea and making it happen, but not only make it happen, but make sure that you can actually reach the public. So it doesn't matter if Microsoft had a tablet 10 years ago. It doesn't matter. Nobody used it, right? Chances are that Apple will be successful there. It doesn't matter that Microsoft was first with the mobile phones and the iPhone 1, right? So innovation is a combination of actually having that idea and bringing that idea to the market, right? So what is my hard disk doing? This is doing something. Anyways, so just from a purely geek perspective, what we wanted to do with Mono many years ago, our whole point was, how do we make programmers more productive? How can we help programmers go from the idea to the market? I don't know that we have an answer, but I'll tell you what I'll tell you what the basics are, and maybe how we can help you get there. So once you have a program, this is basic software engineering, like I said. You can decide to turn it into a programming product, right? And a programming product is basically taking your program, making sure that it's documented, and making sure that the bugs are fixed. That's it, right? And typically in software engineering books, you'll read that it actually takes 3 times as much work as building the program, right? So in fact, I tell my team sometimes, right, every time they go and implement a new feature in Mono, they go and add a feature, but they never document it. They never document it, never put it on a web page. And I'm looking at you, Massey. And the problem with this is that if you write code and you don't document it, you might as well have never written the code, because there's only going to be a couple of people that will ever find this feature, right? So it's very important. I know that we all hate writing documentation, but if you don't write the documentation, if it's not Googleable, if it cannot be found, you might as well not have written the code, because nobody's going to find it. It's just going to be, wasting space and wasting our time. So it is really, really important for everybody to write documentation. I know it's annoying, but I've actually developed a habit of writing docs for stuff. Now the problem, as I said, is, it might take you a day to write the program. It will take you another 2 days just to fix the bugs and write the docs. Now you might decide that you're an elite hacksaw, right? And that documentation is for wuss. And for example, this other one also includes releasing your product, making a tarball, making an official release, right? For example, I love the FFmpeg people because they write awesome code, but for about 5 years they said, we're never going to release tarball, right? They were not building a product. A programming system, on the other hand, is also it's the idea of taking your program and actually interoperating with the rest of the system. That means using standard system configuration files, using existing APIs, right? So for example, instead of just talking to dev audio, you have to talk to whatever audio API we have this week on Linux, right? So that's what the programming system is. And that also takes three more times than writing a regular program. Now, of course, the nice thing is actually going to what is called a programming system product, which is basically the combination of those two. The problem is that it basically takes you roughly an order of magnitude more time than building your program. So if you have a quick hack that you built in a week and you want to turn it into a programming system product, you're looking at 2.5 months of work, right? So you have a cool hack that you built in a week, really it's going to take you 2.5 months. Which kind of explains why it's taking us so long for Mono to go from, from the idea that, oh yeah, we can implement .NET in a month, and the fact that it's taking us 10 years. So anyways, let me take a little detour here. So when it comes to when it comes to enjoying the stuff that you're writing, right? There's certain people that certainly have a pleasure assembly code. There's some of those. For example, there's this guy Mike Acton that writes games, and the guy just writes assembly code for the SPUs on the PlayStation 3, and the guy is really good. But there's only a few people that enjoy that. And the other day we were having an argument because he said when you write software, you should only care about performance, you should only care about bandwidth, and you should care about how many bits per second you can move to the screen. Right? That's a very game-centric view of the world. And and I was reminded that Ruby on Rails pretty much revolutionized the entire web development industry by making it fun to write web apps. Before Rails, there was really the before Rails where everything was a pain in the ass, and nobody really enjoyed building web apps. It was really, it was cumbersome, it was unnecessary, there was no joy in that. And Ruby on Rails kind of changed all of that. It made it so innovation was enabled because it was easier and was fun to build applications. So, in my personal opinion, I think that anyone below the C# barrier is just miserable in their life. One or two might disagree. So, yeah, I'll get to that. So, why do we like C#? I kind of wanted Ivan to be here so we could have a good fight, but he's not. It's a high-level language. It has a C#-y, it has a C feel to it, so we like that. It's an interesting language because the first time that I used C, let me take a step back. Many years ago, I built a spreadsheet called Numeric. And Numeric had an implementation. We're just having that discussion yesterday. And Numeric had an implementation of sparse arrays, right? Because the problem with Numeric is that you have 65,000 columns, or I can't remember, 256 columns and 65,000 rows. And usually you don't have all of that allocated. So you can't just use an array. You actually need to use linked list and a representation that allows you to walk this without allocating all that memory. If you only have one cell in the middle of the spreadsheet, you don't want to allocate 128 columns and 32,000 rows. You just want to allocate that cell, right? And I made so many mistakes in that implementation. It was not even funny how many mistakes I made on that. You could argue that I was an incompetent coder. There's certain truth to that. But also, I finally got my hands on a tool. At the time, it was called Ensure. Now we have a tool called Valgrind that does something similar. But basically, I spent hours with with Ensure trying to find out why my application was crashing. And it turned out that, a lot of those errors could have been found if the compiler had warned me ahead of time, which is when I started using all of the possible warnings possible in the compiler, because I figured it's cheaper to put the warnings in than run with Ensure, right? Not everybody had access to Ensure back then. And that's kind of why we started adding warning all to GNOME, because we wanted to make sure that we had as few errors as possible. But C# in particular is very good at that, because C# went beyond the sets of errors that were reported by C or C++ compiler. They actually flagged a lot of other conditions as errors. So for example, you're never allowed to use a variable if it's not initialized. So the compiler will make sure that if you're trying to use a variable that is not initialized, it will just not compile it. You can throw it at it, but the compiler will just refuse to give you the output. It won't compile. You use a variable that is initialized, you're not going to get an executable. With Moonlight, after many years of writing C# code, I was very happy. And when we did Moonlight, we chose C++. And every once in a while, somebody will add a new field to a struct, and they will forget to initialize it. And how many of you write C++ and have found that problem? And every time that happens, we spend a week. Well, not a week, but a day. Somebody did this, and now something is crashing elsewhere, and you spend a day trying to find out why that happened, right? So there's a couple of, you can do things like creating your unallocators, and there's tricks that you can use to do this. But this class of errors just never exists with C#. The compiler just tells you right from the start, you can't do this, and there's really no work. I mean, you can't really talk the compiler into doing it, short of patching the compiler. And even then, the VM won't let you allocate objects that are uninitialized. So that's one of the things I like about C#. C# is very good at catching mistakes way before you make the mistake. So that's good. The second piece is it does automatic memory management. I'm already 37 years old. And statistically, I've lived half my life, and I don't want to spend the rest of my life, tracking another memory corruption bug, or spending more time releasing memory that, that's what computers are for. Some of you that are 17, you guys go and choke on as much C as you want. I'm gonna be, but I've moved on. I want the computer to take care of that for me. So that's why I have developers like Alan McGovern. Raise your hand. He's still very young, and that's why he still has to write C++ code. But some of us have moved on to other things. We just don't have that much time left. OK. It is also interesting because the entire class library was designed with multi-threading in mind. So this is not something that was added at the end. They didn't add multi-threading as a, oh, fuck, now we have threads. What do we do? Which is pretty much the reaction of every API that was built for C and C++ historically. It's always an afterthought. With .NET, multi-threading was in there from the beginning. So every single class has a very strict contract in terms of what the guarantees for multi-threading there are, and the rules that you can follow to know how something gets multi-threaded. So by default, every static method is multi-thread safe. Every instant method is not. So if you create instances, the instant is attached to a thread. If you need to share it, you need to lock. Right? So very simple rules for that. And when it comes to the language, as Ivan and I will disagree, but when it comes to the language, it kind of has a good mix between being overly verbose and being good enough for writing code in a day-to-day basis. So it's a good language from this perspective. And the other thing, finally, is that C# is already in its 4th revision as a language. It's been upgraded at least 3 times from the initial release, and there have been very major upgrades to the language. So as you know, C# 1.0 was very similar to Java, and every time you hear somebody say, well, C# is just a copy of Java, they refer to the state of the art in 2000, and they obviously have not used C# ever since. It had a couple of extras. I'm not going to go into those. In fact, this morning I was adding 1 slide per feature, and I was up to slide number 20. I figured I don't think anybody really cares, so I deleted all those slides. But it had a couple of interesting ideas. Delegates, which are they're pointers to functions, but they can be pointers to functions in an instance of a class. So that is very interesting. The rest of them we're not really going to talk about. But one of the interesting features is that it had very strong interpretability features. So C# was designed to play nice with others. Then C#2 came out a couple of years later. It's very interesting in that they added generics, similar to C++ templates, but they didn't only add generics to the language, they added generics to the VM. And what this means is that you can actually do generics across multiple languages. It also means that you can specialize code at runtime. It also means that you don't lose type information when you compile the code. Microsoft had a couple of interesting researchers working on the language, so they added icon iterators to the language. This is the foundation for many things, but in particular, games use this technique. Lucas can tell you everything about iterators and how they're used in games. And Michael Hutchinson has a brilliant post from about 3 days ago or 5 days ago that explains how these engines work using iterators. Because games have very particular programming techniques when you're building the AI. Right, so if you have 10,000 guys on the screen, each one has a little piece of AI, and how each one is independent, right? So the idea is, how do you execute a little bit and then resume, suspend execution without having to use a thread per object, right? Let's say you have 5,000 characters on the screen, you don't want to have 5,000 threads. So it's kind of a lightweight threading system that you build on top of iterators. Real interesting post if you want to see that. It's Hutchinson's blog. Anonymous methods. This was the beginning. Of turning C# into a functional language. It didn't look like that at the time, but it was starting to be there. And it added some of it was lexifically scoped, so it started to get some of the functions of scheme. Now, I was going to say something about anonymous methods, I forgot. Fuck. All right, it'll come back to me. C#3 came out a couple of years later, and the big focus of the release, the big focus was this, let me show you that, was this extension of the language that allowed you to query objects. So What am I doing? Maybe I should just do this. So this is our interactive C# interpreter. It's a REPL, and in fact, let me do using system. I think that's already there. So, well, that's a bug. So ignore that. Well, no, actually, that's running the development version. So let me run the other one. This is the non-development version. Right. So that one works. Right, so this gives you an idea of how this thing works. And what works with link is basically you can say from x in directory.getFiles and etc. Right, where x ends with .conf select x. Right, so this is the query language. And the way that this is operating, we'll go through this step by step. But what happens here is that directory.getFiles returns an array. Right? And the language has been extended so that it understands how to deal with arrays, and you can query arrays. So what happens here is that the return value of this thing gets assigned to x, right? And this is where you evaluate this thing. So you say where x end with, so this is your conditional expression, select x. What's happening here is that really C# is rewriting your code. That in reality is something like directory.getFiles. And I'm going to write the rest. And then you say .where. So it's actually calling the where method on that. And it's an extension method applied to arrays. And what the where method is taking is it taking a parameter, x, right? And it's using a lambda function. And it says, well, if x ends with this, right? And the return of this thing is a Boolean, right? Then it invokes the method .select, right? And the return of this beast is actually an IEnumerable. What is interesting about this piece is that the reality is that when I run this thing, well, let me see this, var y equals, from x in directory get files, etc. And I'm going to do the where select x. If you get the type of this beast, it turns out, well, let me just scroll it up so you can see it on the back. So when I run this expression, you'll see that the value of y, right, because C# infers the types, right? So the actual value of y is system link enumerable create selector iterator 10. So what happens is that it actually hasn't even fetched the files from the directory. What this thing has done is it has constructed the actual expression that is ready to run. It builds a pipeline, right? So the entire link system is built on the idea that you create pipelines, right? So the first one is the get directories, the get files call, and then the output gets connected to the where method. And these are all enumerable, so things that produce data when you call them. So these will produce a list of files that will get connected to where, and these will get connected to the select statement. And eventually, this will produce a value, right? So when you iterate over these values, you'll get the values back. I don't know if you noticed this, but you actually, when you're kicking the pipeline, I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with enumerators, but an enumerator basically iterates over a collection. So what you say is, OK, initiate the enumeration, and then you keep looping, and you say, do you have more values? And if you do, get me the next value. Right, so it says, do you have another value? Yes, 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 and it fetches one value one after another, right? So every time that you do this, what happens is that you call the pipeline, and the pipeline basically says, well, do you have another value? So get files fetches the next value. It sends it to where, and where determines yes or no. If not, it goes to the next value. So what happens is that every time that you run this, you run the pipeline. So you run a pipeline every single time. So in this case here, the directory has not yet been fetched. It hasn't even done the directory listing at that point. The way that you do that is if you do something like, if you force the iterator, like for example, var a in y, console.writeLine a. So that's when it actually iterated. So what I did there is basically at that point it did the directory files call, and then it runs a where statement and it runs a select statement, and this is a foundation for delayed execution. So everything that you're doing with link today basically delays the execution until the very last minute. Now, this is not there's a couple of very interesting side effects, and I'm not going to go into that. But if you guys are interested, Microsoft just released a new framework called the Reactive Framework, and it's based on the notion that the guy that invented this is actually a functional guy, and they realized that IEnumerable is actually a mirror of IObservable. So they realized that just like there are operations for enumerating a collection, you can actually turn it around, and instead of enumerating and basically requesting the next token, you can build the exact same pipeline on the other way, and instead get notified when events happen. So you can say, well, when something happens, let me know, and here's how you let me know. Anyways, it's worth researching that if you're interested in the subject. Now, so this was the beginning of turning C# into a functional language. There's a fascinating look at C# as a functional language, as a purely functional language, in one of the Microsoft blogs. I strongly recommend you read it because it's a easier soft landing into functional languages than languages themselves. Anyways, one of the things that they did with link, like I said, is what I just showed you is link to objects. I would show you the XML one, but I don't remember the syntax, and I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to do it live. So just go do it in the in the comfort of your own home, in the privacy of your home. The other one that they did is link to SQL. And what is really interesting about this is how they did this, and I'll explain that in a second. But in general, the link infrastructure is not limited to these 3 Bs, the blue ones that Microsoft shipped, but you can build link to anything that you want, right? So today there's like 50 link providers, links to databases, links to directory services, links to in Hibernate, all kinds of other junk. Now, what is really interesting about what they did with link is that, and with SQL, is the way that you typically, you talk to SQL is with object relationship mappers. Now, let me tell you a story before. A friend of mine was working at AT&T a few years ago, and they were, oh yes, and it was the day that they were in the United States. They would let you switch from one carrier to another, right? So it was the day that they would let you, if you were a Verizon customer, you could switch to AT&T, or if you're AT&T, you could switch to T-Mobile. You could switch from any company. It was the first time that you could do this and not lose your number. It was a law, it was passed, and every telco was supposed to do this. So they built some software for doing this thing. But the problem is that the software that they built used an object relationship mapper. That means that you write very cute object-oriented code, right? So you have classes, and those classes map to a database. And the problem is that when you do this, all of these object relationship mappers, what they do is that they turn a couple of accesses to a class into select statement, a bunch of select statements, and very quickly that translates into hundreds and hundreds of queries to the database. So the day starts, and within 2 hours of the number portability kicking in, the entire AT&T systems go down. And they stay down in the United States for about 3 weeks. And the problem that they had was that they were using ORM mappers. And it worked fine when you had 3 guys testing the software, but it didn't work when they opened the floodgates to the world. And what happened, and the story that I'm telling you is my friend of mine, that it's basically a SQL admin expert, that all he does is go and fix broken databases when they break. And so what he did is they went to the site and said, well, what's going on? And it turns out for refreshing a page just with the customer data, they were doing about 2,000 SQL queries, right? So every page is very pretty, very object-oriented, but you were doing 2,000 SQL queries, right? So his job was basically, in a period of 3 weeks, assemble a team of people that would remove all of the ORM code and just stick basic SQL queries in the database so they could get away. During these 3 weeks, if you went to the United States and tried to get your number changed, a guy would have to take down your notes in a paper. So if you went to the store, somebody would take your data down in a piece of paper, and they would call you in a couple of weeks, and they will have to figure out how to reimburse you for the plant charges or whatever. It was a little bit sad, and this was about 4 years ago. So it's not that long ago. So what they did with Link to SQL is, instead of trying to come up with an object relationship, ORM system, what they did that is very interesting is the same syntax that I just showed you before. From X in foo, let's say where X.age bigger than 30, and something else, select X. Right? So instead of so the way that you would do this typically is, you would if you do this thing with a traditional relationship database manager, you would basically go to the database and say, well, give me all of your records, download all of the records to the client. That's a simple way of doing it. And then let me do client-side sorting, so the client will do the where and extract the data and hand it over to the other side. So obviously that doesn't work, and that's a horrible idea of how to do SQL databases. So what they did is, remember when I said that actually what this did, was a concatenation of expressions, right? So basically this would be something like, let's say that foo is my database, so it becomes foo.where, and it contains this expression, X.age bigger than 30, and the rest of your expression dot select, right? So what happens is that the where method, right, typically takes a function, right? It takes a function that in this particular case it's generic, so it takes the X and it returns a Boolean, right? Now with C#3 you have a trick. So instead of your where clause taking, right, instead of taking that argument, right, that would be a function that you can call, and you would pass your X and it would return true or false. I would say yes or no, which is what it would do. There's a little trick here, which is there's this special type called expression. So now your where looks like this. And when the compiler sees that you're using the expression type, right? When it sees that you're using the expression type, it does not generate the code for this thing, right? It doesn't generate a lambda. In this case, it's generating a method with this body. Instead, what the compiler does is that for this same code, it would generate, let's remove this so it's simpler. But it would be basically, it would generate a tree that has a node. It would say something like new, bigger than. So it's a node bigger than, and then it says, well, it's a field reference in the object X, and the field is called age, and the constant 30, right? So basically what's happening is that the compiler is providing you with a constructed tree of the expression as it was found in the source code. So it's something like, let me rewrite that. So basically a node like this that says less than, X.age. So you get that node, and then you get another node that has the number 30. So what happens is that Link to SQL actually gets a tree, right? It gets the full tree expression of what your query is, right? And what it does is it transforms this beast into the equivalent SQL code, right? So when you write this piece of C# code, it actually gets translated at runtime into the proper SQL statement, and that's a SQL statement that is sent to the database. This can be abused in many wonderful ways, and I encourage you to explore this further. So anyways, I'm going to move on from Link. There's a lot of papers that you can read on the subject. Now, let me show you, for example, let me go back to my Dingus. Well, this is just the HTTK window. I want to show you that there's not going to be any time. So again, this is the same expression. This is the same expression that I was showing you before. So in this particular case, what I'm doing is I'm creating an expression. I'm creating this lambda called increment. An increment takes a value and then returns the value incremented, right? So you could do something like this. So this is the version, the non-expression version of it. So I can say func of int and int increment. It's
the top half of the screen.
oh.
The bottom is very difficult.
Oh, damn it! I don't know how to do that.
Resize the window.
Oh.
No,
Very good idea.
resize the terminal. And
That is a very good idea. I like you. I like you. You're a man of solutions. All right. So func int incrementer. I'm going to call it inc. And this is a function that takes an argument, right? And returns the argument plus 1, right? So if I say inc, it tells me, you know, that's a delegate, right? It's telling me it's a function and contains that bit. So if I call inc with 10, it will return 11, right? Now, the other thing that I can do now is I can say, well, no. That just did it live. So what I want instead, let me call it inc2, is I want to get the expression tree, right? And again, it's the same thing. What? Oh, using system link expressions. All right. So expression, and I really need to add up arrow to this thing. Now, this is the way of open source.
I think it works in the console one, the C# one.
Oh, and it fucking works here. Damn it.
You did that too, Miguel.
Yeah, I wrote this tool. I suck. Anyways. Now, let me show you what inc2 is, though. You see this? Do you appreciate the beauty? Are you witnessing the beauty here? I mean, are you getting it? Does anybody not appreciate the beauty of this thing? What? No, seriously. Do you see what happened here? In this case, inc was just returning me, well, I have a function that has this type, right? It's telling me it's a func that takes an integer and returns an integer. That is it. It's already compiled. There's nothing I can do. That's it. But in this particular case, it's returning me a tree. It's a tree, and the toString method is actually decompiling that thing and showing me that in human terms. Let me show you the type of this bad boy. So inc get type. Again, let's look at the first one. So that's a precompiled type. Now let me show you inc2 get type. Oh, what is that? It's a system like expression that takes a func inside. Now, I can't really do much with this thing. You know, I cannot use this guy because this is actually an expression, right? I can't invoke this one like I did the other one. So let's go back to the other one. But what I can do, there's a service that lets me compile expressions on the fly. So now I can say inc2.compile. Oh my God, this is so exciting. All right, let's do this. var compiled. So what is compiled? It's that guy. And now I can say compiled 10. Oh, so exciting, so exciting, so exciting. Now, this just did an addition. It just added a number. It's not that exciting, but you can build entire applications with this beast. Oh, so exciting.
Why is it nicer?
What is it nicer? Blah, blah, blah. No. Why is it nicer? Well, it is not nicer in many cases. If you don't need it, don't use it. Right? That's the most important thing in computer science. Never use something you don't need. Now, it might seem very obvious and very stupid, but I've been myself in many cases using stuff I didn't need. Callback comes to mind. Some people in the audience might remember that mistake of mine. You know. But it is not very useful for a lot of people, but this particular thing is incredibly useful for the SQL case. And the SQL case is, I do not know what I'm going to be talking later to, right? And I need to construct a perfect statement, the correct expression, and I can do it at runtime. At runtime, I don't know what it is. I mean, at the compile time, I need to determine that at runtime. Now, what you saw here is basically a simplified reflection emit. This is using reflection emit to generate the code on the fly, JIT compile it, and compile it to code as you're doing it. You don't seem convinced.
That seems like a good reason to use it.
Anyways, it's so exciting. Now, this is completely off topic, has nothing to do with this, but since we're here, we might as well do it. I decided to add to this beast, you know, every time that I put a value, it renders it, right? Typically, it calls the toString method, and it shows you that. But if you return an image, it actually shows that. So let me show you a little. This is a plot function that basically takes a lambda expression, takes a double and returns a double. So I'm able to do, I'm able to do graphs like that in the interactive C# shell, right? Not very interesting, but you can do things like, I don't know how to, I don't even know the name in English for this beast. What is it called? Parabola?
Parabolico.
What?
Parabolico in Greek.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter. These guys are Americans.
They're in Europe, thank you.
What? Oh, right. I thought my audience was, freedom-hating Americans. So let me check this one. Oh, that looks horrible. Anyways, you get the idea. Anything that you can turn an image, this beast is going to render it. And it's a nice little use of the C# evaluator. As you can see, C# is no longer a statically compiled language. It can be used interactively. We delivered this before Microsoft, so just take note. Going back to the innovation piece, it doesn't matter that we did it. Chances are, when Microsoft does it, it's going to reach more people than we do. But just remember, we did it first. And I want to say, let me tell you a story. It's a little bit of a conspiracy theory. But I was sitting next to the program manager for .NET one day and said, you want to see our latest hack? And I showed him this thing. Like, holy shit. So he emailed Anders Helsberg and said, do you know that these guys have a REPL for C#? And he showed me Anders' response, and Anders said, well, that's a bummer because we want to do that, but it's not going to happen until code 11, which is going to come in 2012. So we're 2 years ahead of them. And so at the PDC, Anders actually demoed his REPL stuff, which is not available to anyone yet, but he demoed that stuff to the public, taking away a Zander. I just want to put that up there. Make of that what you will.
Yeah.
Yes?
Someone's got time.
Oh, all right. We're going to hurry this up.
Yeah, but no, it's okay.
Really?
It's lunch night, so you can.
Well, nobody's hungry here. So, OK, so I'm just going to go very quickly here. The C#4 features that are very interesting. And in fact, I thought that this was just going to take me like a third of the talk. So we have 2/3 left. I'm not going to talk about this too much, but C#4 has dynamic support, which means that you can now change the. Anyways, everything that you heard about Iron Ruby doing, C#4 does now. So who needs that language? Moving on. Now, again, this is very important for everybody. Not everybody's happy with C# like Ivan just showed, right? Programming choice is a little bit like sex position choice. Not everybody likes the same. So I understand if somebody wants to use something else. So, wow, these people are hungry.
Let's stop for 2 minutes. So if some people want to
Leave?
Just leave the block, so we can go on.
All right. Well, you guys probably already heard this. I'm not going to repeat this stuff. This was really interesting. I'm not going to repeat it. This is fascinating in my opinion. This afternoon, perhaps, if you come to the Moonlight talk, Al Tucker is going to talk about a very interesting development when it comes to compilers and C++. So you should come to that. I'm going to skip this. In fact, you know what? I'm just going to skip the rest. And we should just do Q&A after the session. So thank you for coming.